Welcome to Horticulture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture. Well, hello, friends, and I hope it's a sunny day wherever you are, because it is a sunny and warm day.
Bit steamy.
Bit steamy. I think some thunderstorms are about to roll in here over the next day or two, but it's nice to see the sun, and I feel like it's been an appropriate spring. It's been a respectful spring. We say that about the rain a lot, but it's been a correct spring of what we're used to versus like the wild temperature swings.
Alexis liked it, therefore it is appropriate and correct.
Where's the lie, though?
Yeah, that's what I'm coming to understand. I try to do appropriate and correct behavior as much as I can.
I'm by the book, so and anybody who knows me goes, "Wait, what?
What book?
Which book exactly are we referring to? The ones
about?
The plants also read, or pretend that they read, right? So
we are not, and I'll note we are not talking over Jessica and Ray, though that would not be much of a stretch.
Yeah,
they're not here for various reasons, and we are here, and we will rock you with some discussion coming up.
We will riff at what we are good at.
What's new in your neck of the woods, Alexis?
Well, from a more personal farm thing, I know we talk from it more of a professional standpoint most of the time, but
you're a professional farmer.
Yeah, I just mean like a UK professional, but it is on topic today for what we're going to talk about. So, from a farmer point of view, we just came off of Mother's Day weekend / week / year of my life is what it feels like, because we plan so far in advance. But yeah, so just coming down off of the high / roller coaster of that. And I want to say, for if any of you are farmers who, whether it's Mother's Day or any other event where you kind of plan for a long period of time and then it's go, 4 a.m., 5 a.m. till 11 p.m. every day for a week type situation, it's okay to not know how to feel the week after. Coming down off of that and then going back to like things are normal, things still have to get done, all you want to do is rest, but like you still have the everyday norms of orders and planting and yada yada yada. I just wanted to throw a little lifeline out there and say it's okay, things will reorient themselves in the world, and if a couple plates fall, some balls drop, it's all going to be fine. So you did great.
As Tom Petty said, it'll all work out.
It'll all work out. It always does.
Eventually. Yeah. So did you celebrate? Did you celebrate the end of Mother's Day?
I was a potato on Sunday, and it was
like a costume kind of party of one?
I was a spud.
These are my eyes.
Which my potatoes are sprouting. Fun fact. You brought them up. But no,
you brought it up.
You made it. I thought about eyes on my potatoes, but yes, I was a couch potato. I don't like to say I couch rotted anymore. I prefer to say I fermented on the couch because fermenting makes everything better. So
it's restorative. It's transformational. It's
love
probiotic.
It, all about it. Probiotic.
Professional biotic.
So it was lovely. I think I needed one more day, but the farm orders had to go out. So, but I did get one full day of being sweatpants. The only thing I had to do was water the greenhouse, which, is okay. And that's soothing. I don't mind to do that. And the peonies wait for no man or woman. Or person. So woman, person. So we did. I know human. I did have to harvest that morning, but very briefly and only the minimum. And then I was in sweatpants the rest of the day. So that was my celebration. It was glorious.
That's awesome. That's great. Well, you also celebrated this week. You've got a new friend there in your office with you.
Oh yeah. Will my thing go down? I can't show you. Well, I'll show you before the end if you're watching online, but there is a sweet little baby kitten in my arms right now and she is asleep, and I shall not
TBD on name?
TBD on name. We had to let the husband pick that out because he's going to call her something no matter what I call her. He will come up with his own name. So it's just better
Alexis's
to.
husband is like the cutest cat person. He loves cats. It's so cute.
I've probably told you guys about the cat at our tax lady's office.
I don't know
Well,
if you talked about it on the pod or
I don't know
not.
if I've talked about it on the pod. Our tax lady has a cute, very small, like it's an adult cat, but very small. And apparently she's not very friendly to most people, but of course she loves my husband. And so every year we go, she crawls up into his lap and lays there during our taxes and just, I guess, soothes him during tax time. And we last time we went, he was sitting there, and the man who hates taking pictures with me in general for pretty much everything except for maybe fishing looks over at me with a big smile and he goes, "Are you going to take my annual cat picture?" And so I did. And it's the biggest grin, bigger grin
Aw.
than I think any of our wedding photos. But that's okay because he's happy.
So he has a knack for
He's a cat
appealing
whisperer.
appealing to hard to cajole small adults. A cat. I'm talking about cat. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not talking about anyone.
Not me. Not anybody in particular. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I celebrated Mother's Day by almost rupturing my appendix and then subsequently having it removed by some medical professionals.
Woohoo!
So that was pretty cool. My
Mom
mom
was
got to
like,
drive to to Lexington to see me instead of me taking the flowers I had for her to Louisville. So that was cool. And ever since then, I've just been just wandering through life.
appendix free, one
But
organ short.
yeah. You picked up a cat this week. I lost one appendix this week. It's just the way of things. It's like Indiana Jones
Like
with the
one in,
little
one out.
golden monkey and the sandbag. It's just like that.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense.
But it did not prevent us from brainstorming a fun idea for this episode.
We think so.
You will have fun listening, or else. Um,
Brett.
I think about seasonality, this concept that lots of people talk about in local food and local agriculture, learning how to eat seasonally, purchase seasonally. A December fresh red rose, not probably coming from the state of Kentucky, a ripe red vine ripened tomato, likely not coming out, for your New Year's Day bolognese that you're making. But there's an other component to seasonality and the flow of things that partially reflects the seasonality of production and seasons and stuff like that. But it also reflects our social seasonality. And so it's like this kind of marketing and markets
Mhm.
side. What kind of got me thinking about it initially was seeing Alexis and the other flower farmers that we know and work with just unravel, over the last few weeks leading up to Mother's Day. It's a really fun time
Unravel feels accurate.
where we celebrate mothers, and it's a big day in the floral industry in general. And
We call it
so
our Super Bowl. Like that's like the
yeah.
word used in the floral industry. It's the Super Bowl.
And so in the same way that the literal Super Bowl, I think, is the day when the most wings are eaten in the United States,
Mm,
and therefore the chicken industry literally plans around that and prepares for that, the horticulture industry has some of these demarcation points throughout the year. And I just thought
mhm,
some of them that I was going to run through the list, and then
mhm.
maybe we'll take a little closer look at some of
Love it.
the particular touch points throughout the year. Does that sound all right to you?
Sounds great.
So I'm going to start with our, all time is arbitrary. So I'm going to start January 1. The first kind of big day is Valentine's Day.
Mhm,
Do you have any I think that is the time of year when a lot of the CSAs are targeting to really get folks to sign up.
mhm.
Community supported agriculture, the subscription based service. There's a lot of preparation going. It's right in the heart, or maybe a little bit late actually, into the unofficial gardener holiday of seed catalog season.
Yeah, yeah.
But any other, Valentine's Day, is there any bold moves that people would try to make in the flower
Yeah.
world?
In the flower world, a lot of growers are switching to I say a lot. I mean, growers who are wanting to switch are going to doing some like hydroponic tulip production to hit the Valentine's Day market. So that's definitely been a growing trend. And then thinking about like value added stuff that people will do, if they're doing goat's milk stuff or they're doing jams and jellies, like which might seem kind of random, but you give chocolates for Valentine's Day. So you give like a box of, chocolates and with, some good jam and some, goat's milk soap or something like that. So I think people are offering that, as well as maybe not having a product, but a lot of people target Valentine's Day as like a CSA push. And so trying to get that, those funds in early so that they can purchase some things is always helpful. But it's nice, they say, okay, you're not getting a bouquet now, but here you can give your person, a box of strawberries and a voucher for, a 6-week CSA that starts in April or something. And that's been pretty good from a marketing standpoint.
So next year, in lieu of a box of chocolates, Annie is going to get a jar of jelly and a spoon.
Honestly, will she be mad? Like, she
Say,
won't.
go off. Here you go.
Sauerkraut. Just give her a jar.
A jar
big
of
old tub
sauerkraut and a
of
jar of jam. It feels very old world. Show
here
her
for it.
parents that I am a good husband, that I can provide.
You're providing.
I can provide these nutrients even during the darkest of days. So, the next, I guess, through spring, there's various things coming out. That's kind of the development of the early season, both for vegetables and for flowers and for a whole lot of other stuff. And then we talk about Mother's Day, and we're going to come back to that in terms of, for the flowers, to just think about what was the actual, when did Mother's Day prep actually begin?
When did Mother's Day start?
It may help to uncover why it felt like the year of the mother in the floral calendar. But Mother's Day also, this time of year tends to be when I would say early to mid May. It's when stuff starts warming up. It's when we can put out our tomato plants. It's when people like to overhaul their landscaping. And really interestingly, for a lot of our large bedding plant producers, so things like the impatiens and the petunias and the geraniums and other stuff like that, a lot of the annuals and things that go into beds, it's like the big time of year.
Yeah.
Because some of the large ones will sell a huge volume of the amount that they're going to make in the course of a year during this window of time. So if every Saturday is not very good weather and people don't want to go to the garden center and get, spring fever and buy a bunch of stuff for that 6-8 week period, it can be kind of bad. Bad news.
That stuff is, and I mean, living plants definitely have more of a window, but it's still in a way perishable, because if those things get too big, you're also spending a lot more money to grow, keep growing them for weeks because they didn't sell. So yeah, it's even with live plants that are, in a pot, it can be costly to have to keep them for, another 3 weeks because it's been rainy.
Yeah. And we're talking hanging baskets. We're talking about stuff for the planters. We're talking about stuff for in-ground beds. And even a little bit in the perennial plant world, that this is I think that kind of goes into fall as well. But it really is a huge time of year where we can grow petunias and impatiens all summer long, but people really think about those things in terms of this time of year. And so as a result, it's a market driven seasonality to that industry. That is, it's kind of interesting. We'll talk about another one of those here in just a few minutes. So we're going to come back to Mother's Day from the floral perspective. But I think also shout out to veggie transplants for this time of year, because that's what a lot of people are also getting those to put in their veggie gardens. And then we have this period over May, June, where, for me at least, time seems to hit warp speed. And oh my gosh, I can't believe it's almost the solstice. Oh, there went the solstice. And now here we are at 4th of July. I think this is another inflection point of the year. What do you think about in terms of the market side for specialty crop products in July?
Yeah, when I was working as an agent and helping with a multi-farm CSA that had veggie as well as dairy and meat products, 4th of July kind of, even though it was a CSA where people purchased way ahead, even the growers planned around 4th of July being something that they wanted to really do up for that week for their CSA, and they had more like meat options available. Their goal was sweet corn for 4th of July because, people were grilling out. That's when a lot of people have parties and get-togethers and pool parties. It's kind of week of or leading around. There's like, 14-day period kind of all right around that area where people tend to be home and doing stuff. They're probably home from vacation. And so I think that that is another touch point for people who are doing, market garden size, the livestock people wanting to have things processed by then. You can even be doing like baked goods, people who are, maybe doing strawberries in the spring and they made, jams or different things, and they're going to put them into cakes and cookies and have those available at the market for those 4th of July parties. And so I definitely think it's a summer touch point for a lot of growers because they just kind of expect more people to want stuff during that time. What have you seen in your experience, like with farmers markets
I
and
think
stuff?
that's exactly right on. I think around those times, not to say people go completely buck wild with their spending, but
Sure.
for parties, they might be willing to spend a little bit more, get
Mhm.
something a little bit special. They're going to be buying a little bit larger volume.
Mhm.
They may be feeling patriotic and want to support their local farmer.
Right.
But I would say all around that 4th of July, and it might be several weeks earlier or later, depending on the year, depending on the crop and the
Weather.
area. But thinking about the kind of first field tomato,
Mhm.
the first sweet corn. People don't get as excited about watermelon. I get pretty excited about melons.
Which is so weird because everyone seems to want it, but they don't seem as excited about it.
Yeah, it's not like, I need that.
It's the first
Um,
watermelon.
I also think of July, late June into July as kind of the first window where a few of our local apple varieties start to pop off.
Mm,
Some of those June
mhm.
apples, and it's also like the countdown in my mind. It's also tends to be this June July window is berry season.
Uh-huh.
So that's more. I like that because that tends to be that the production window is so narrow
Mhm.
that we can form around that in the local food production economy
Mhm.
compared to some of these other things where we're trying to hit you can grow flowers pretty much almost year round,
Right.
but Mother's Day is a special day.
Right.
Berries, it's like you got this window. Those flowers flowered, they got pollinated, they formed berries.
Mhm.
Get them if you want them. Otherwise, you're out of luck. Sorry.
Yeah. See you next year. Yep.
So that June, kind of the blueberry into blackberry season, is another part of this year that I think is pretty exciting, and it tends to draw people in. I just think of a lot of our direct markets are probably at the peak of what they're going to have as far as variety goes
That's yep.
around this time.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
you might have a little bit of the cooler season stuff that's still hanging on, or even a little bit that you've planted late that maybe just coming on. There's a whole other second act to the farmers market and other direct market season in the fall where you still have summer stuff and you start getting
Mhm.
some really good fall stuff.
It's
But
interesting that sorry, well, before we jump to the next, how it's the inverse in like the floral bedding plant. Basically, the visuals were I want to say like quote unquote like the visuals, um, where so if they're having people over, they've probably already planted all those annuals from that early spring. They've gone out, maybe they've planted their own little cut flower garden, and they're not buying flowers as much. So it feels like the inverse for that season. It's like flowers are in the spring, out in the summer, back in the fall type situation. And I always find that interesting to see happen because it's the opposite for like tomatoes and things like that. It just depends, I think, on where people's priorities are.
yeah, and even with some of the markets, so some of the farmers markets, for instance, so with the Center for Crop Diversification, we work with a lot of farmers markets across the state. Some of them in larger population areas, they will have growers who will have produce, in some cases year round, but
Mhm.
like let's just say from March
10 more.
1st through November 1st,
Yep.
they will have produce. Other markets, in either case, the epicenter of the farmers market year is around 4th of July.
Mhm.
So there's some markets that are only really open June, July, and maybe a little bit of August.
Mhm.
There's other ones that are open May, June, July, a little September.
Mhm.
There's others that are open again. And so I just think of it like as the kind of the epicenter, the peak. It also tends, at least for me, to be when the plants go from like a lot of those summery type plants go from like their ascent and their
Yeah, it's like the
youthful,
bell curve. Yeah.
yeah, to like, oh, it's like, I don't know, 37 or something, the eight for humans. It's like, oh, I was on my way up and now I'm just going to try to
But now my knees
gracefully,
are starting to hurt.
I'm going to try to gracefully go down the rest of the curve here.
Yeah,
We'll
the
say
disease
40. We'll
starts
give us
to
both
sit
some
in.
time and say 40. How about that?
Thank you. I
Um,
appreciate it.
but there's this interesting dynamic where, in my opinion, maybe the best time of year for produce in Kentucky, I'm
Mm.
curious what your take is on this, is September.
Oh yeah, because like the few cooler nights, I swear, make a huge difference in like taste. And like you said, you're bridging that where you can have like a fresh tomato and then like some kale salad, like on a fresh kale salad. You know what I mean? Like those types of
You could do
instant.
a kale salad,
Mhm.
grilled broccoli,
Mhm.
grilled peppers next to the grilled broccoli, and tomatoes on a nice burger with, whatever, and
Totally.
so, however, this is yet again an example where the seasonality is
Mm.
determined not just by our plant
Our weather
zone
and yeah,
and weather and
everything.
all those things, though that does really impact it. There's this nasty little thing that happens in August called back to school.
Uh,
And I'm telling you, it is one of those moments. It's not entirely like the end of farmers market season. There's a lot of folks who still go,
mhm.
but it does radically change the dynamic
Sure.
of a lot of our markets and the number of people who attend them, and it
Well, but
tends to drop
also
off.
the growers, a lot if they have kids and the kids soccer games have started back up or what, although I feel like sports are year round now, and if you're a parent of a kid with a year round sport, I am so sorry. But yeah, I mean they get busy, and so the amount that they can plant and take care of and having a Saturday open to go to market is also changed. So it's kind of from both ends, but definitely the consumer is just busy.
And so I think, real quick shout out, or the opposite of a shout out, negative, shameful shout out to the month of August. If the Mother's Day window unravels you, as far as tasks go,
Yeah.
climactically, August, if you're in agriculture outside, even if you're doing all the smart things,
Yeah.
it'll
It
wear
will.
you down in Kentucky. That's in Kentucky. It's
Uh,
August. In
yeah.
in further south, it's July through September.
It's when, yeah, if you're in Kentucky in August and you know a farmer, doesn't matter what they farm. I don't care if it's row crop, I don't care what it is. If they farm in general, just, maybe bring them a cookie or, a really nice cold glass of water at some point and just be like, "Hey, thinking of you, bud. It's all gonna be okay. Fall is almost here," because they are dead. No matter, like you said, no matter if they've planned or if they're marketing a lot in the summer, or not, but the plants are still probably in the ground in the summer and have to be taken care of. And that's enough. We've
Yes.
talked about that on some other episodes of like the draws of August.
Yes, but August gives rise to September. We said, in my
Mhm.
opinion, for annual production at least, one of the best times of year. But September and moving even into October, yes, we are back at school. Maybe some of the markets are cooling down, but one of the market types is just heating up.
Oh, yeah.
And that is, put on your flannels, uh don't have to wash your hair. We're going to a farm.
Put on your hat, your cute hat.
Yeah, and get ready for agritourism season. Get ready for apple picking, get ready for
Uh,
corn maze, get ready
uh,
for donuts, apple
yes.
cider, get ready
Apple cider
for
slushies. Yum.
all of that stuff. If your kid's in school, back to school, yes, but maybe they will go to a pumpkin patch to pick up a little pumpkin,
Hmm.
locally grown pumpkin. So, as far as the market side of things, I was looking up, I saw some estimates that 80%, something around 80% of the fresh market of pumpkins in the United States is sold in the month of October.
Oh, 100% believe that. Like,
I'm kind of surprised that it's not higher, and it probably is. I don't know. That was probably just one of those nerd academics being conservative, but yeah. So you think about pumpkins, we think about them often. People think about them as a commodity,
mhm,
but they are a product that has been growing on a vine that was transplanted back way. That's kind of the idea of
early June.
kind of what
Yeah.
we're getting at, and we're going to come back around to that. So I won't stay too long on this, so we can get to the little bit slightly deeper dive. But all of that fall item decor, all the corn shocks, all the
Mhm.
bales of straw, all of the ornamental gourds, um, all that stuff is kind of, again, we probably, or we definitely could produce pumpkins that would come out in August,
August.
September,
Totally.
October, November even,
Mhm. But
and
the
but we don't.
value is,
The value
basically
goes
0
way
November
down
1st.
just because of
Yeah.
those market dynamics, and it's just a reality of that. Try to sell
A
a
mum, a potted
corn
mum.
shock on
Oh,
August 1st.
yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Mums is a great example of another one of those products that, it's not necessarily just October per se, but it is
September.
like
Yeah.
very much that fall window. And there's all kinds of prep work that's ahead of that. We, as consumers, or even as, as marketers thinking about, okay, you just get us the product and we will market it.
Mhm.
There's a whole lot of things that happen before that we'll talk about, but this weird dynamics where these strange little traditions of like Halloween, like we have
Mhm.
Halloween now for all of these weird geopolitical reasons across a long period of time. And the result of that is try to sell a pumpkin on November 1st. See what happens.
Unless it's a pie pumpkin, it's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And that's probably why pumpkin pie became a thing, because someone was like, "I got all these pumpkins I didn't sell," and, like, brilliant marketing right there.
And so then the last stretch of the season will lead us back around to what we talked about in January. So it's the Thanksgiving era of the year.
Mhm.
I'm in my Thanksgiving era,
Mm.
and that's again, I think of that as that we have certainly a lot of high tunnels and other types of
Mhm.
production systems that are able to extend the season so that you could have some nice greens or spinach for a spinach casserole for Thanksgiving, or you
Yeah.
might be able to have, even in some years, you might be able to have a couple of tomatoes that, you're able to nurse
Sweet
along till
potatoes, different
almost
things like
around
that.
then, or you pick them and then let them ripen. Um, but I also think of it as value added season.
Yeah.
And that's not
Mm.
a new thing.
Mm.
Canning, fermenting, freezing, all of that, except all of those things, maybe with the exception of fermenting, all of those things didn't necessarily happen in November.
No. They've been happening all summer long.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, that's again what we're trying to get at here is just long term. My vision for this conversation is we might think about developing it into some graphics or something that might show. So you want to market here
Yeah.
now at this particular time, this particular product. Here's all the things you're going to need to do, a year ahead of this.
Leading up to it, right.
So, for instance, um, with the bedding plant world that we talked about, that has that really narrow window in May. So they now this will come out probably toward the tail end of that window, maybe still somewhat in the middle, but closer to the end. So once they do that, yes, they are still going to produce some stuff and put stuff out and sell, but they're already thinking about 2026. They're
Correct.
already trying to get their media, get their plastic trays, get their contracts set up, all that kind of stuff. Um, and that's something that if you haven't done this before, or you're a consumer and you're not, you haven't really thought about this much before, you don't necessarily think about that forward progress. And we've
Mhm.
we've had some recent conversations with folks about tariff impacts and imports and all this kind of stuff and one of the big things we think about with the potential tariff impacts is the cost of the inputs.
Mhm.
But the reality is for some people, they aren't going to buy their inputs until January of 2026.
Right.
And so who knows how that's going to happen. Other people are buying them now. Some people will be buying them in the fall.
Mhm.
So anyway, it's just
Yeah.
this idea of like, we think of seasonality as this harmony with nature. But if you are trying to do commercial horticulture, it's harmony with nature while also
Harmony with the
respecting these
market.
human milestones.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we didn't mention Christmas necessarily, but if you're gonna make wreaths, for example, or garland or anything like that with live product, yeah, it's probably not getting harvested until around Thanksgiving, uh, but you're ordering it in August and trying to basically assume how many you're going to sell, because you can't, it doesn't matter if you put it out. Very few people are going to buy pre-order a Christmas wreath, right, in August. So you're kind of going to have to just figure that out based on maybe something you've done in the past, or, you'll never get it exactly perfectly right, I don't think. So you're pre-ordering that in August. It's being cut in November, and pretty much, we say for in that realm, pretty much anything after December 5th from a strictly, you know, um, wreath or what's the word I'm looking at, like the decoration.
Decor. Yeah.
Yeah, from a decor standpoint at least, your market is done really by, we say December 1st, maybe you push it to the 5th, but if you don't have that stuff in people's hands and out, to see them by really that first kind of weekend, so to speak, if you go do a Christmas market or something like that and can sell them there, like you're done. So your market window, because nobody's really going to buy one before Thanksgiving. So really you have the day after Thanksgiving till what, December 1st, 2nd, maybe,
Yeah.
to get that in front of people and in their hands. So that window is really small from that point of view. It's just, and then, you maybe have the month, again, you have the Black Friday till mid-December to sell a CSA as like a gift, because usually those are more expensive. And so if you're wanting to sell a CSA, you kind of have to get that in front of people before they go buy, little smaller things. And then there's not enough money to, maybe give someone a $150 CSA voucher. So yeah, the window there is really small as well. But yeah, thinking of like how people think about that. It's easy to talk about it from like a cut flower perspective, but I like the bedding plant one, just like to go back on that, because it's such a big thing where they're making most of their money within that 6-week period. And the soil and the media, yeah, that all might be bought a year in advance. But if we just even think about the plants themselves, most of those places are, those large operations are buying in what they call calloused cuttings. And so there's another operation that starts that stuff from seed or from tissue culture, and they grow them up just big enough, and then they take them as a cutting. They leave them in a very specific kind of humidity chamber to callus over that edge so that they can be shipped kind of overnight or within a couple days. And
Very brief aside, I selfishly would like for Alexis to lead us on a podcast propagation series.
I would
W's in the
selfishly love
chat
that.
if you want Alexis to do that.
Comment with 5 stars that you want propagation. But
I
that
just
was
think it's
my
really propagation is both. I find is like more simple and more complicated
It's an
than
art
you think.
form. It's truly an art form.
And
Like,
maybe we could get Sherry on to talk about
yes, oh my gosh,
some of
the
her tips
woman
and
who taught
tricks.
me everything that I know about propagation.
Sherry
And
Dutton,
she's
right?
yep, Sherry Dutton. She will
I've been
be.
watching a lot of clips from Yellowstone, which
Oh,
is the
really?
Dutton
Oh,
family,
yeah,
and I
the
was like, am I
Dutton.
just making up the Dutton thing? No, Sherry Dutton. All right.
Yeah, she will be a new extension associate, so we're gonna have we'll have her on to talk about that. But she is brilliant. But anyways, not to like get over it, but so they're gonna get that stuff in, and let's say they're trying to target that, Derby Day, Mother's Day, like that's the prime window. Maybe a week before, that's kind of right in that area. They're getting those shipped into them probably around February, and they're sticking them and pumping them up and getting them ready to go January, February for that 6-week window. And then they're going to start with poinsettias and mums, if that's like kind of what their operation does. And poinsettias are something they're going to start in like August. And they're going to do kind of the same thing over again. But then all the things they needed just to grow those items are ordered a year in advance. And maybe they've even ordered those cuttings a year in advance because they
Mm-hmm.
have to be grown from seed or from tissue culture. And so
That's a whole component of the particularly of the nursery and cut
Mhm.
flower world. I think. I mean,
Yeah.
it is for other places too, but is the sourcing of the plant material itself.
Yeah.
Because really what you're actually dealing with is like 2 or sometimes 3 or more nesting growing
Mhm.
years in a row, that like the plants got wiped out, there was no seed last year, and as a result
Mhm.
you have no seed this year, or the plants got some sort of problem and the bulbs that they produced that you're going to then plant can't be used for some reason.
Right.
And so that aspect of it, I think it can be really interesting, and yeah, it's risky, but part of what I want to convey is there are some businesses, large businesses, where they primarily market through just one channel, and
Mhm.
that's one time a year, and it's what you would call risky.
Mhm.
But they're large enough to mitigate the risk, and they're experienced enough to mitigate the risk, or they just have a high tolerance for risk. A
Mhm.
lot of our smaller producers tend to diversify their markets,
Mhm.
but as a result, they have all of these timelines that are overlapping. And
Yeah.
so when we talk about this with like the fall garden, for example, where you're just trying to keep up with your tomatoes and pick them on time and, spray them to keep the fungal pressure down. And you're telling me I'm supposed to be starting broccoli and starting lettuce and starting this other stuff. And I'm like,
Yep.
yes, you are. And that is a little bit of like the microcosm of the bigger picture. And
Mhm.
so when people talk about off-season marketing or diversifying their markets, I, on the one hand, I'm very supportive of that. But on the other hand, it's a hold on a second.
Mhm.
While you're delivering the thing that you've been working on for the last year here, you're
You
going to need to
also
be thinking about this next little bit. So maybe we'll stick with the Mother's Day window.
Mhm.
And Alexis, we can process your recent,
Trauma.
recently scarred over wounds.
My recently calloused wounds.
Yeah. So maybe tell me what is in a typical diverse bouquet that a florist in Kentucky might be delivering on Mother's Day,
Yeah.
flower wise.
So I would say for most of Kentucky, if the weather has been, pretty normal, let's say, pretty average, we're just getting into peonies, which is an awesome timing for Kentucky. And if you're a northern grower and your peonies miss Mother's Day by like a week or two, I'm so sorry, because they are usually prime for us around these parts. Thank goodness. So you're getting peony season. A commercial florist might do roses and stuff like that. But let's just say, for the sake of it, we're going mostly local. So we're looking at peonies, snapdragons, campanula. Some of your perennials are going to be hopefully starting to bloom, that are going to bloom around the same time as peonies. So mock orange is a great one. Obsessed
Mm.
with mock orange. Baptisia, surprisingly, I think a lot of people think of Baptisia later, and it does depend on variety. But some of those early native ones are going to start blooming when peonies are blooming. So Baptisia, Amsonia, another native that's I forget the common name of it, but it's a beautiful light blue. If you've not heard of Amsonia, highly recommend it. It's just bomb-proof plant. So you've got some of those things, and then if you've got a high tunnel, you're looking at ranunculus,
Blue Star.
blue star. Yes, blue
I
star.
didn't. I wanted to say it, but I didn't look like an idiot.
I know. I wanted to say, I was like, blue star. It's like what it looks like, but then I thought, yeah, that's too simple.
So I have a very brief side note. My mom and my brother called me a couple of weeks ago they were shopping at a nursery for plants. And my mom had picked out a juniper
Uh-huh.
cultivar named Blue Star.
Uh-huh.
And my brother had picked out an Amazonia
Uh-huh.
Blue
Blue
Star.
star.
And they referred to each of them as Blue Star, going back and forth, asking me the same question. It was like kind of like a who's on first kind of thing. Like, well, where should we put the Blue Star? And I'm like, you should put that by the house. Well, where should we put the Blue Star? You should put that by the house. But you just said we should put the Blue Star by the house. And it was
Like,
Blue
you do
Star,
realize
juniper.
both of you are saying blue star, right?
Yeah,
Like,
no, they do not. And it was pretty awesome.
yeah,
It was a fun
something that's
experience for
something
me.
my dad would do. He asked me, and I'm like, Dad, what? Which, again, as plant people, we tend to think it's more simple than I think it actually is. But
Blue
whatever.
Star, who's on first?
Yeah.
What are you asking me for?
But yeah,
So
so
you
Mother's
have
Day
some
tulips are
perennials.
another big one. Yeah,
You
perennials.
have some biennials.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Snapdragon biennial,
Foxglove. No, foxglove is though.
foxglove.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and you have some um, annuals, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And so
annuals and like
when
winter
are
annuals.
those various things started or
Yeah.
touched?
Yeah. So the perennials, if you're, let's say, if they want them to bloom in 2025, I'm most likely going to have planted them at least by spring 2024, depending on the type of perennial. But generally, let's say for bloom in spring 2025, that perennial might have been planted, or uh, more likely in fall of 2023. So it's like you've got basically a year and a half at a minimum. Those peonies, 3 years at a minimum is usually what we're saying for that. For the perennials and the woodies and things like that. So 2 to 3 years, depending on the type of perennial it is. For those annuals, it is still early for Kentucky to have annuals blooming around Mother's Day, unless you have a high tunnel. And so for those things that are in a high tunnel, most of the time those are planted October, November. And then sometimes there's another wave in January coming in, but that's going to be like a small amount of things that are very specific. But for most are going to be October, early November. And then bulbs. So tulips are one that a lot of people want for Mother's Day and hit for Mother's Day. And of course, we know those are planted typically in the fall. So, you're looking at for annual production around 6 months of care, 6 to 7 months of care to hit the Mother's Day window. Very few times, it really depends on the weather, but very few times can you get away with seeding in let's say early March. Some stuff you can seed, but usually those won't hit that May window. It's just not enough time with the cool soil. So yeah, you're looking at a minimum of 6 months to create a Mother's Day bouquet. And for a truly robust bouquet, I would say, then, you're looking more at like a 3-year uh, time. Not to say you can't make a pretty bouquet out of just ranunculus, but they tend to feel a little bit smaller. And so if you really want that gorgeous peony bouquet, you need that you're going to
So
hit that higher price point and, kind of that market that you're looking for.
one of my underhanded reasons for wanting to do this podcast and to talk about this stuff is to make a pitch for thinking creatively about collaboration. This sounds like I'm setting up for like a ad read or something, but I'm not. Not that we don't have lots of people knocking down our doors to sponsor us, but we're trying to
Sponsor.
stay. We are owned by no one. Okay, we're one of the last free
Although
media.
we have had requests for merch, and I'm here to figure out how to make
Yeah,
that
we have to
happen.
figure that out. But I think what I just heard is to produce all the things that go into
hmm
a single bouquet, diverse like that,
hmm
is a long-term project. It's
hmm
complicated, it's
hmm
complex, it can be difficult.
Yep.
And on top of that, you then have to also market it. And so
Yep.
that's a shout out to like our Soki Floral Exchange, our Kentucky Flower Market groups that do some really great work to, like, let's say you grow really great peonies, but you would like to have your flowers be part of a more diversified bouquet.
hmm
There is opportunity for some, either you can buy from them, you can sell through them, that kind of
hmm
thing. But it's complicated. So maybe we'll anything else you want to say about the spring side of things?
No, I guess the thing I like to say is if you're wondering why like Mother's Day bouquets or, flowers around that time are really expensive or you feel like they're really expensive, they're not gouging you. It's because they have been growing those items for, sometimes 3 years, and they were scraping snow off the tunnels and ice, and they were spending hours covering and uncovering things, twice a day every day all winter long. So uh, trust me, it's not as expensive as you think. And maybe that's just not the bouquet size for you. Go with something smaller if you feel it's too expensive. But I like to throw that out there because, like you said, people see something in front of them. It's been warm for a month, so it's easy to feel like, well, they just grew these. No, they've probably been growing for 6 months to 3 years to get to this point. So just that's why it costs $50.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I think
yes,
that's
I'll
spot
get
on.
off my soapbox. We
And
appreciate you.
another aspect of like the produce and flower and any of these
Mhm.
is that you're also paying for the cuts that got frost damaged
Yeah.
or got some sort of a blight or weren't the right, that got that,
Mhm.
weren't
Or the right
marketable
color.
and rotted
Yeah.
on the vine or whatever it may be too. And our large systems of food and floral distribution, which do some amazing things logistically, have made us lose a little bit of sight of some of those other costs associated. So
Mhm.
let's just flip real quick over from spring to fall. I think a lot of people have a general sense of that gardening window, typical, 4th of July.
Yeah.
But if you like this style of episode, we can talk more in depth about any of these. But I'm thinking about like the orchard,
Mhm.
apples and peaches and pears. Oh my! I'm also thinking a little bit about pumpkins. And I'm thinking about looking beyond that, or during that period, even to the value added stuff.
Mhm.
So we just came out of a spring window where, all in all, as Alexis said, it was appropriate and acceptable and good. Um,
Just
but
respect the
not
spring.
that being said, we did have a couple of days that were pretty chilly
Yeah.
in April in particular.
Mhm.
And as a result, so during that window of time, a lot of our fruit trees are in at some stage of putting out blooms, putting
Mhm.
out their little flower buds. And the magic of that is that flowers eventually become fruit. They only
Woohoo!
become fruit if they don't get damaged and knocked off by one thing or another in the course of their existence. And so a late frost can cause all these problems. And so that's one example of, okay, so you're picking this apple, you pick apple, yay, Jonna Gold, we love it. Arkansas Black, we love it. Picture with the family in September, October.
Mhm.
Well, that little individual fruits journey began at least back in March, April when that bud
Right.
was emerging.
Right. If
But
you don't take
beyond
into
that,
account yeah, exactly. If you don't take into account just like the health and the sprays of the tree itself to be able to produce those blooms, if you just say that apple started, yeah, in March and April. Mhm.
but the tree on which the apple grew,
Mhm.
in many cases, what's the do you all have did you all have like a specific like general timeline for planting to fruit bearing for fruit trees?
Yeah, it depends on what you start with, but let's say the average size of an apple tree going in, um, even if you're just getting it from a box store, we say is like 5 years. But if you're putting in, if you're an orchard that's putting in something, much smaller because you're putting in hundreds, it's probably closer to 7, just depending on the rootstock variety. But yeah, 5 to 7 years.
And breeders are constantly trying to push how fast it can fruit,
Hmm.
balancing that with long-term health of the tree. And so again, you've got this longer term thing. You've got and if it just so like if it so happens that every Saturday and Sunday from September 15th to November 15th is rainy and gross and nobody wants to go out and play on the mud farm, then suddenly that's the market window for a lot of our agritourism operations.
Yeah.
How about pumpkins? We said October is go time,
Hmm.
peak time of year. What's the backstory on that? As far as I was just looking at some, and there's different varieties of
Yep.
pumpkins. Some of them, again, plant breeders are thinking about markets, and they're also thinking about if you can have a plant that has all the, or sorry, if you can have a fruit that has all the characteristics that you want, but it can get out there sooner or quicker.
Hmm.
And that's fewer times you have to spray it, less time for it to be in the field for disease and insects to get to it,
Right.
more time you theoretically could use that field for something else.
Correct.
But I was looking, and it like one of the early jack-o'-lantern varieties is a 95
Hmm.
day to harvest. I tend to think of pumpkins in somewhere around the 100 plus or minus 10-day
Yeah.
window.
Yeah.
So Alexis, can you do the plant math for me there?
So the rule of thumb is sometime in June is usually
Mm-hmm.
what we're saying. Again, depends on the variety. Some are going to be early June, but if it's a 95 day, a smaller, little pie pumpkin or something like that, you might be able to push it to the end of June. But yeah, that's the rule of thumb is June is pumpkin time.
Yeah, and so you're putting those in as little tiny plants. They look very similar to like a cucumber when you put them in the
Mhm.
ground, and then they grow and they grow and they grow and they set fruit. And many of you all have grown these
And you're
before.
seeding them in probably mid-May, for that window too. So
And so hold on a second, Alexis. So you're telling me if I were going to grow bedding plants or cut flowers,
Mhm.
I would be having to seed
Oh,
pumpkins at the same time that I'm trying to going crazy trying to sell my flowers,
yeah.
get my bedding plants out, staff the farm stand,
Yeah, if you're selling for
get
Mother's
tomatoes in the
Day,
ground.
you also have to get tomatoes in the ground and seed your pumpkins, and yes, that's exactly it goes right back to the diversifying your market is very helpful, but you have to sell it at the same time you're growing something else, at the same time you're harvesting something else, and all of that rolled into one.
Yeah, and you may be harvesting beets or carrots or
Mhm,
lettuce or whatever if you're selling those. So like diversification, we're Center for Crop Diversification, is very conceptually cool. It's very
mhm,
exciting. You will never be bored, but it can be a whole lot. And this is why there are some people who hear some people who are crusty and think that they're funny, like our old friend Josh Knight, who used to be on the podcast, who hear the term season extension
uh-huh.
and they say, "Why?"
Yep.
the season is long enough. It's hard enough, and this idea like, okay, these are times where I can either rest or I can plan or I can do these other things. And you want to extend into that window so you can sell more. Understandable. There are things that go along with that.
Yeah.
Um,
And there's a reason why a lot big companies have gone into, one area, right? They're less diversified because to expand, and they had to, have less. And so, you often do less things if you're more diversified. You do less carrots because it's a space constraint, but it's
right.
also just like a brain constraint.
Yeah. And you'll hear some producers who talk about starting out with a like, let's do everything, and then they
Mhm,
realize these are the things I'm good at, these are the things I can sell, which is
mhm.
a big one. I'm going to focus on that. And so
Yeah.
I think, again,
Or
while
they pick a
I'm
market to focus on. It might not even just be a crop. It could be like, I hate summer, so I'm not trying to be out there in the sun and growing a bunch, having to harvest. I want to be out there to just care for stuff, to get it through till fall. And then when I have to be outside more, then that's the window. And, some high tunnel growers, growing in a high tunnel in the summer is miserable. So they're trying to hit those
yes.
windows, and then they, instead of having a winter break, they have a summer break kind of thing. It's not quite the same, but it's a little bit more. So, yeah, you can also have less markets, still have a lot of crops.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think the only other thing I wanted to mention was we have talked about, and lots of people love to talk about value added products, and there's
Hmm.
for good reason. Often that is where you can make a whole lot more money because you are adding
Value.
value to the crop through some sort of processing, whether that be putting in a jar so it can sit on a shelf instead of, you have epic strawberries. You can either eat them within 4 days, or we can can them in some sort of a jam or jelly, or freeze them, and they can sit in a freezer on the shelf till whenever you want.
Hmm.
For Christmas morning, you want to have some strawberry preserves on your pancakes. You can do that.
Nailed it.
Um, but that process of adding value to the crops that you're growing, if you're talking about you're going to grow the crops and do the value adding, happens while you are harvesting that stuff and probably selling it other places too.
Hmm.
So like the reason you want to harvest that, you want to can those things when they're at the peak of flavor, you also want to sell those fresh to people when they're at the peak of their flavor,
Hmm.
then that means you're going to have to be doing some, either arranging for or yourself doing some value adding in the middle there.
Right.
And that's why there are some businesses who decide we actually are going to move away from growing any of the stuff.
Hmm.
We're going to buy it from people, and we're going to do the value adding, the canning, the whatever. There's some people who move away from we're not going to sell into fresh markets. We're just going to do value added,
Hmm.
and that's because they feel like they can make more money on yes, those jams and jellies and canned goods and frozen stuff, but also on even baked goods and other things where they can incorporate their products in.
Right.
And so I think that's just another side of the marketing angle, is you're just sort of just adding another thing. Every
Yeah.
time you're doing this, you're adding another
Yeah.
thing.
Well, it's a lot like flower. I know it's easy for me to talk about flowers, but
Yeah.
flowers, it's you could there's the bouquet, which is the added value, or you sell wholesale and you sell straight bunches. And it's so easy to package up 10 stems of the same thing. You put it in a bunch, you wrap it up, you forget about it versus curating a bouquet and having to pick, 10, 12, 20 different items and then put them all together, make sure it all looks good. It's the same thing across and these different markets, the same as a jam or a jelly. Do you do a seedless raspberry and a seeded raspberry jam? Do you have to do both? I mean, it's one, you can even get in depth, and I just
Hmm.
and those are all decisions that happen pretty much while or very close to while the harvesting is happening, while the spraying is happening. I know you just said that, but I'm
No,
reiterating
totally.
the importance of that when you're thinking about branching out, as well as a consumer, why things cost what they cost and why things are just not available. And like they're tired.
Hmm.
Farmers are
Yeah.
tired.
Because when we consider a new enterprise or we consider a new crop,
Hmm.
the main question that's asked is sort of like, is this possible? Is it possible for me to do this given
Hmm.
the constraints of weather and climate and my own knowledge and expertise or experience or whatever. And there are many, many times where the answer to that question is yes, and the answer, should I do this, is no. And
Facts.
I remember working back when I worked in some of the high tunnel stuff, and just thinking about people who were doing research and trying to push and push the limits of seasonality of local products. And there was several years actually, where we had kale that we were producing from the research tunnels that would be available literally year round. And now there's a whole angle there. There's a whole thing there where you're actually growing most of the leaf prior to like December, and then it just sits on the plant in like almost in a form of arrested development for a period of time, and then you can harvest what's there. But anyway, but the question would then be, if you are primarily marketing into farmers markets and maybe a CSA, and it's kind of tricky and challenging to grow these things for over the winter. You're having to cover stuff. You're having to take care. You hit the snow off. All the other things you mentioned. Do you just because you can? Does that mean that you should? And some people offer the answer of the institutional market. Sell it to a school, sell it to a university or a hospital or a restaurant. And in some cases, it can actually work. I think restaurants are an example where, yes, it can work, but sometimes they're not going to buy the volume that you might need. Or conversely, a school might be able to buy the stuff, but they're going to buy it at a price point that may not make any sense for you doing all of this crazy extra stuff to bend the seasons to your will and say, I am the victor here.
When really, you could probably be putting a different crop or even a cover crop in there to be improving your soil so that you have healthier, better plants that you're putting less into down the road. And so, that's the opportunity cost, right? Of growing maybe when you shouldn't be,
or you canned a bunch of tomatoes that you grew in the field, and you spend your days, instead of you put in your cover crop, and instead of tending to your greens and keeping them alive, you go and set up some holiday markets and you sell a bunch of that stuff, during the off season.
Right.
And so this is I don't know, this interesting tension and nexus between the markets and the human cultural extensions of how we celebrate things and think about things, and how horticultural products are just woven throughout our lives. There's also this whole economic component of how and when people spend money. And then there's the seasonality and the production stuff that all the plant nerds are excited about and are fun. And don't get me wrong, it felt very powerful to eat greens on January 1st that I grew and harvested, that day. But there's more to it than that. And so I appreciate the indulgence, Alexis indulging me with this concept of the kind of deep dive through these cycles. And if you are interested in that, like this, I'm thinking of it almost like some people do what's called life cycle analysis, and they'll do it for something like carbon or energy or something like that, where they follow a product through every stage of its development, and they figure out how much carbon or whatever. Something almost like that, like a product cycle analysis or market cycle analysis or something for different products. And so we would, we could take I don't know what, a zinnia and a peony and a foxglove, and kind of explore that a little bit more. Or maybe even like a strawberry jam, that I'm going to do annual style strawberry production. So I'm planting it in September, harvesting the following May, canning it, and then selling it, through that next year. It could be an interesting one and agritourism's full of those.
Of product analysis, like of product market analysis or something like that.
And even try to see if we could find a producer to like talk about a little bit how they're thinking about the timelines of their processes.
I kind of want to call this episode "Just Because You Can Doesn't Mean You Should."
Yes,
as a
that's like
a vibe check.
That's like from Jurassic Park. They were too busy asking whether they could to stop and think whether they should.
Whether they should.
Or I guess he's more like they were too busy. It's like the Jeff Goldblum. That was
Perfect.
a terrible Jeff Goldblum. I'm sorry,
I
everybody.
mean, it's a was, but we knew where you were coming
Hey,
from with it.
well,
So,
okay.
well, if you're interested in that, definitely feel free to shoot us an email, a message on Instagram. You can, if you're not following us on there at Horticulture Podcast. We do our best to post regularly and throw up some cool things and share cool things from other partners that we love and work with that might be, interesting and useful to you. So follow us on there. You can always shoot us an email with just, questions, ideas for other podcasts, love if you just want to. Also, if you don't mind to rate us 5 stars, it helps other people find us, makes the algorithm happy. And feel free to leave a comment on maybe what you could do, but you know that you shouldn't do. That sounds like a good idea to me. We'd love to hear it. So we appreciate you guys being here today, and we will chat with you next time. Have a great one.